Welcome back. So today we're going to do another quick listen, quick impression. This one is the SymphonyEars Hexad. So those of you who aren't familiar with SymphonyEars, started, I don't know, maybe a year or a little bit more ago. Isaiah is his name. So you see him on Facebook. He goes by Isaiah on Discord as well. So yeah, he is definitely a kind of member of the community who started a company, started building IAMs not that long ago. And I mean, when you take a look at the build quality and what he really put into it, it's like super impressive. Feels really good. I mean, again, there's just a lot going on here. So dual dynamic drivers, I think it's dual BA, and I think it's actually 4 BAs. So it's like kind of two groups of two, which we can kind of see there's kind of one there, kind of another one there. So yeah, build quality is kind of off the chart. So as I said, he is around on Facebook. His name is Isaiah. Do say hi to him. Do compliment him on his sets and his build quality, even if you can't afford them at the moment. Do keep them in mind. And I'll say, probably more important than talking about Hexad, he just released Prestige, which is his top-of-the-line set so far. And there is the link there, and I'll put a link in the description as well. But that is not quite tuned the same as this one, so this won't be like, I wouldn't say that is a direct upgrade over Hexad. I would say it's a very different set, and I think that's kind of a more important message than talking about Hexad, but that's just my opinion. So what is Hexad? This one is a dual 10mm biofiber dynamic driver, 2 Sonion balanced armatures, and 2 others for treble. So again, you can kind of see the 2 dynamic drivers there and how they are tubed and connected. You know, super cool. I love kind of looking at the insides of IAMs. You don't really get to see that all that often. So if I had to pick, guess what was going on with what he had in his mind when he had a design goal for this kind of tuning, I would say fun, full bass shelf, no BA timbre. And I think he kind of mission accomplished on those 2 things. Very fun, kind of a heavy sound that more so resembles DD tuning. And you can kind of look at the graph and see that what really happens in this style of tuning is you have this kind of sub bass, mid bass, so full bass shelf. Then you have this no shout, and then you have like a little bit of energy there, and then you roll off a little bit early, and that kind of shifts the whole tone of the set kind of a little bit lower, a little bit thicker, a little bit warmer, a little bit more natural. It kind of shifts you away from the higher energy hybrids, kind of the more treble heavy hybrids that are actually popular right now. And that just tends to take your balanced armatures, make them sound a little more natural, kind of you mostly hear what's in the sweet spot of the balanced armature, as opposed to some hybrids kind of poke out too much energy out here. That tends to lead into more BA timbre, not as natural, and just kind of a more energetic way. And I'll say this kind of shifts balanced armatures to sound just a little bit more like dynamic drivers in that respect. But I'll say that plenty of people who tend to focus on timbre will sort of appreciate this kind of tuning. Plenty of hybrids go this route, and I would say that they tend to, maybe prefer timbre over forcing taxes is what this tuning tends to do. And I'll say what stands out on this set, it's the bass level, carrying through with the mid bass, a really fun sound. The treble is very relaxed, and it really accomplishes that lack of shout and lack of sharp BA timbre. Those of you who are really opposed to those things but want to experience a hybrid, this is kind of a nice version of that. So there are some nitpicks, but I will say that, mostly for people, there's a lot of sets that really kind of harp on these things and get them right, and Hexad is certainly one of those things. The nitpicks are more for if you are like an Odyssey type of guy, you just like to have a much fuller extended treble style. That's a different style than what Hexad is. So these are kind of nitpicks, but they are more referring to what those other sets kind of sound like. And I think sets that try to focus on timbre, they tend to lose the upper treble. It's a shortcut to less BA timbre, and that's exactly what happens here. Just as I said, some companies, some brands just push too much energy out there, and it puts the BAs into kind of a sound that isn't as pleasing to hear. So you cut it a little bit short, and it tends to clean up that little problem. But what's immediately noticeable when you do that is the stage is a bit smaller, the mids tend to pull a little bit inward, and it sounds a little bit too full because it's missing those top end dynamics. And most timbre sets kind of trade that timbre for resolve, right? It's super hard to sound resolving without the upper treble contribution. And that's just kind of my personal opinion, but that's a lot of people will focus on kind of the lower, this whole set kind of shifts lower, and you kind of focus on this lower mid, kind of right in that vocal area, and they tend to sound very full. And that's one way to do it. But I think, and I'll say it kind of right there, I say the pulled back upper treble is really hard if you know your tracks well. It forces a lot of attention right there. And it's a common timbre trap that forces the vocals to sound less open. It pulls the stage inward, and it tends to sound kind of more like a headphone than an IEM. But you sort of immediately notice what's missing, and you sort of immediately notice, if you know your tracks well, you kind of realize that the vocals sound kind of interesting and they're right nice and full, but everything around the vocals is sort of missing, and the part that should be there isn't there because this is pulled back. And it's just one of those things. I tend to notice those things. Other people will probably never notice those things. Just matters of what other sets you listen to and what your preferences are. But yeah, I think this style does accomplish a few things really, really well. And then definitely, if you are used to hearing headphones, this is very much what a headphone kind of sounds like. And if you switch from a headphone to an IEM, you sort of hear all these things that you don't hear on headphones because the upper treble is so clear and present on IEMs. But, you don't necessarily get that on headphones. So, yeah, I understand why a ton of people love this style tuning, and, I get it. So, Hexad, do look up Prestige, do look up Isaiah. If you see him around on Discord or Facebook, give him a shout out and say your bills look amazing, and I hope to own one day. So next we'll look at another hybrid. This one is BGVP DMA. So tuning-wise, again, not all that far from what Hexad does, and you can basically see right there. And as I talked about, I think Hexad is one version of a hybrid that tends to pull back the upper treble, and that will sound a little bit more natural, maybe more in line, more coherent to some people, more cohesive to some people, because you don't have the BAs kind of sticking out. But, they also put a lot more energy out there in the upper treble, and this is going to sound end-to-end kind of more like a hybrid that you may be used to, kind of more of a typical style hybrid. And again, they have a really nice build quality as well. This one's got a bunch of drivers. So that is a single dynamic driver. There's 2 balanced armatures in there, right there, and there is 2 bone conduction drivers as well. So cool setup, nice drivers. It's about $299. But what is it really? Again, it's a fun, balanced, energetic at both ends, done on nice drivers, so it's fun and resolving. It sounds very much like a hybrid. I am a fan of V-shapes, and this one kind of checks a lot of boxes that should be there. So there should be a solid low end. Again, I think Hexad and DMA both have a really solid low end. No booming, no bloat, just tight impact, sub-bass depth. The mids need to be slightly forward to avoid that V-shaped recessed vocal sound, energetic enough to separate from the bass, engage the listener, still sound open, clear, and resolved, and V-shape should sound super dynamic, kind of a wide range. And this is sort of where I think hybrids have to really get this right, otherwise it tends to sound over energetic. So sub-bass level, you take this down just a little bit, that gives you kind of a clear version of sub-bass, give it a little mid bass, and that kind of gives you the lower range depth that I'm talking about. When I say a wider range, you still need a lower range that still sounds deep, but then you can carry out the upper range and through upper treble and extend it more, and this will balance with the depth that you have here, and you sort of have this end-to-end really, really nice wide range of frequencies that come across in energetic music like EDM. But it really fills in sort of the IEM experience, kind of, I said right there. But, I think what Hexad did, that's one way to do it, and it just kind of forces everything back this way. If you want to stretch it out, you do need to kind of make sure there's enough sub-bass, make sure there is some mid-bass, and then balance it out with kind of this, it's not conservative upper air extension, but when I look at the bottom of kind of the graph right there, kind of right in the mids, and you cut across, right at about 10K, you should actually see where the frequency response is. That's kind of a very typical thing. Where Hexad is that's just a little bit lower. Sometimes it's just a little bit lower than the bottom of the curve. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, but typically you can cut across at about 10K and see about where it should be. And that's kind of exactly where I like my V shapes to be and where I like them to carry out upper extension. And as I said, on treble, there used to be lowered upper balance. And again, you want to have this just a little bit lower. This has to be a little bit present. You have to hear both of them. This one can't be too high, otherwise you can't hear this one. This one can't be bumped so far above, trying to get over this one that it feels out of balance. DMA actually got a pretty nice balance here. The lower can't obscure the upper. Like I said, the upper needs to bring bigger stage projection, present out to the edge of your hearing for those EDM tracks, and it just fills in that IEM experience. So when I say that Hexad kind of has that headphone experience, that's exactly what this kind of sounds like. Some of those headphones, especially the lower cost ones, don't necessarily extend out in treble in the way that IEMs do. And when you hear a set like DMA, which is kind of extending all the way out to the edge of your hearing, that is a IEM experience, and you kind of sit back and say, wow, that is very wide. You know, it's like 20 to 20, full-on experience of a hybrid, very energetic, very, very engaging. You know, that is what a fun V shape should be. And DMA kind of hits all those check boxes for a fun V. And again, I would say it looks kind of peaky right there, but it scales as a V should. And this one actually scales a little better than most of them because the bass actually rises with these little peaks there. So sometimes you see the peaks and you turn up the volume and you're like, this is going to get super peaky and uncomfortable. But when the bass rises and you get some more of an impact, more depth to it, and this kind of rises at the same rate, that becomes a very, very fun, nicely balanced V shape because they're rising, because both sides are kind of rising at the same rate. The nitpick on this style, and I would say DMA is a really, really nice set, obviously a nice looking set, but you don't really need to spend $300 to get a fun V-shape tuning. There's lots of cheaper, lower cost versions of V-shapes. Some mid bass is kind of there, definitely, but still a little bit lighter in weight. Again, if you're going to extend out in this way, kind of all the way out to the edge, especially kind of in this way, you can actually bump this up just a little bit more and just put a little bit more depth to it, and these two will actually balance each other out. And if you just kind of listen to them back and forth, you'll figure out that they kind of pulled this out a little bit wide and just can put a little bit more depth to it, and that would have sounded fine. It's not going to sound muddy. It's just going to sound more balanced and a little bit better in note weight. So the verdict on this one, I don't think it stands out as a super set, the best V shape out there. And even with bone conduction, I think it's okay. But I have no complaints on it. It is a nicely done, balanced, playlist killing V shape, right? Just what you want in a V shape. You shouldn't have to skip any songs because they're hitting some peak, or there's some weird, too much air, or there's not enough bass. This one should be your playlist killing V shape, where you just kind of start at the beginning and not skip any songs and just enjoy the IEM experience as you should with DMA. So that is what I got on these two. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.